Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be continuing our coverage of the 2018 St. Louis Rapid and Blitz tournament in the Grand Chess Tour, and all of the competitors in the Grand Chess Tour are in attendance here. If you're not familiar with the format, there are 9 rounds of rapid chess. Each player has 25 minutes on the clock. Each move they make, they get 10 additional seconds. And then they get into 18 rounds of Blitz, where they have 5 minutes on the clock and 3 seconds added on for each move that they make. Yesterday, we saw 3 rounds of chess played. Fabiano Caruana won all 3 of those. He will be playing Magnus Carlsen later this year for the World Championship. Seems to be just cruising. We're looking at a game today from round 6, but up into round 6, everyone is still chasing Fabiano Caruana. He has 8 points out of 10. The scoring's a little bit different in this tournament. Usually in tournaments, when you win, you get 1 point. When you draw, you get a half a point. When you lose, you get 0 points. In this tournament, you get 2 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, and then 0 points for a loss. You have Fabiano Caruana, who has 8 points out of 10 coming into this round 6. And we'll be playing 3 rounds today and then 3 rounds tomorrow to end the rapid section. But our competitors today, White's going to be played by Maxime MVL, the Frenchman. Outstanding player, always is going to be going for the win. That's what we appreciate about watching him. His opponent playing the black pieces, Vachier-Lagrave, very, very strong player, always near the top of the ratings. So both these players are near the top of the leaderboard. Both of them are chasing Fabiano Caruana, knowing that they can get points very, very quickly with so many games of chess yet to be played. Both of them will be looking for a victory. MVL starts the action with pawn e4, pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then bishop to c4. So we're used to seeing that Rai Lopez here with bishop to b5, but instead getting it started off with bishop to c4. Black responds with knight to f6, getting into the 2-knight defense, and then pawn to d3. I got a little excited because you never know in a rapid style format how players are going to play. I thought we might see one of my favorite openings, the fried liver attack, knight to g5. Double attack here on this pawn on f7. Really tough to defend against this, in my opinion, with short time controls. But we see more of a quieter game with pawn to d3. Not trying to get out of hand right now. Pawn to h6. Castle on the king side. Pawn to d6, rook here to e1, and then already out of book line is pawn to g5. So black really going for an aggressive line here. Very seldom do you see at high level play going into a novel line only 6 moves in. Usually the first 10 to 12 moves are all theoretical. Lots of games in the past that they can look at and say, yes, I've seen this, how this works, and they have their own nuance to it, but for the most part it's all memorized. This is a brand new line, so not really both sides familiar with this territory, which is always exciting for rapid style. We see pawn to d4. I think worth considering pawn to h3, stopping the attack of the pawn coming down here to g4. Also don't want your opponent to just play bishop down here to g4 at some point. But after pawn to g5, pawn d4, and then pawn g4. So decided to go ahead and push right here. And some of these moves you may not see if it's in longer style, but you're always going to be putting pressure on your opponent in rapid style. The more time you can get them to think, even if you have a suboptimal move sometimes, that's usually the path you want to go down. The pawn takes here on f3, and then pawn takes on f6. Want to capture that knight back. Since you did just lose your knight, it's going to be bad if you take with your queen right here, because then just knight takes on e5, attacking the queen. White's going to go down in material here. You can see the knight take the bishop, queen takes. All of a sudden, white is down in material. So needs to get that material back. Pawn takes here on f6. Knight to e5, attacking the bishop. Knight here to d2, and this is kind of interesting as far as how white wants to defend and continue here. This knight is attacking the bishop, also defending this pawn here on f3. Could just not even worry about this pawn over here. Could retreat the bishop. Could play knight to a3. It's a little tricky if you play knight to d2 because yes, it defends this, but it also blocks a lot of your development. And it puts whites in a tough spot. Black can really develop his pieces, Queen takes on f6, bishop coming out here, depending on to h3 or g4, depending on where white is going to go to. And white's just really defending here, blocking his own pieces. But that's exactly what white decides to do. MVL decides, yeah, I want to defend like this, but knowing that he needs to move his knight at some point. Queen takes on f6, and then pawn takes on f3. So white is behind the 8-ball here. He's up a little bit in material, but what he lacks is kingside safety, knowing that his opponent can start to really put a lot of pressure on him. We see rook here to g8 check, king to h1. Don't want to play king to f1, allow your opponent to come down here, bishop to h3, add a tempo, force now the king to move. Maybe king up here to e2, then bishop to g2. You can see how bad things start to look from white's perspective. So we see king to h1, and then knight takes on c4. Knight takes back on c4, and then bishop down here to h3. So putting a lot of pressure on white. And now the main threat is bishop to g2. If white were to look at this and not think that there is a huge threat, maybe play something like bishop to e3, well, the game's completely lost. Bishop to g2 check, king comes here, bishop up here, f3. Not only is this a discovered attack and the queen is going to fall, it's much worse than that. The game is going to be over. King to f1, only move possible. Rook down here, g1, sacrifice after the king takes. Queen over here to g6, it's going to be checkmate. No real way to stop this. Queen come down here, g2, it's going to be all over. So white plays the most logical move, but really the only option in my opinion as far as how to continue, and that's knight to e3, stopping the bishop coming down here to g2. Black decides to go ahead and start pushing on the king side. He has a strong attack, so Vachier decides, okay, let's go ahead and push. Could have castled on the queen side. I think that this was a longer game. He would start to develop more pieces, but right now he thinks pushing material is the main way to go. Bishop to d2, and then he thinks for 4 minutes and decides, okay, I don't have anything else going on. I'm going to castle on the queen side. This was his longest thought process through the first 15 moves of the game. So my guess is he was really trying to figure out if he had some other attack besides just developing here, getting his other rook involved into the game. Now MVL continues, queen to e2, pawn d5, trying to play pawn to d4, removing this knight here on e3. If you can do that, then all of a sudden black is looking really strong with bishop to g2. White recognizes this, plays rook to g1, wants to alleviate the fact of having to have the knight here on e3. We do see some exchanging on the board, and then pawn takes on e4. Doesn't do as much to play your pawn down here to d4 because the bishop's not coming to g2 anytime soon. So pawn takes, pawn recaptures, and then queen comes down here to b2, just starting to gobble up some material. We are approaching the endgame, so every pawn is essential here. We see the queen take here on h5, and then bishop back here to e6. Important to bring the bishop back here. This pawn on f7 is critical to hold on to, and you don't want to play anything crazy. If you look at this, you may say, oh, there's a free bishop here on d2. That's going to be a trap. Knight to c4, that's going to fork material. If the queen takes, knight comes down here to d2. Now the bishop can come up here. All in all, this is not going to be what black wants to do. So instead of doing that and falling for that trap, he plays bishop to e6, rook to g8, pawn to f6. Nice little discovered attack with the bishop attacking the rook. Rook is forced to move, comes back here to h8. Then queen up to d4. And this is just a tricky spot. There's so many attacking lines that black has. How does white really continue here? Did think for several minutes before he looked at this and said, okay, my bishop right here is being attacked on d2. How do I hold on to this material? He could have easily just moved his bishop, but in the end decided to go ahead and play queen to a4, defending this bishop, also attacking this pawn here on a7. If he can somehow sneak behind enemy lines and attack his opponents. Queen takes on e4. Usually it's a good idea if you can take material, put your opponent in check. That's exactly what black does here. King to g1. Now pawn to a6. Does not want to have to worry about that queen capturing and then chasing the king around the board here. And Another tough spot for white here. Now his queen and his rook are not connected at all. The bishop and the knight are back, on the second and third rank. They really can't get involved into the attack. They're forced to just play defense, not lose any more material on the board. So how do you really continue in this spot? White plays bishop to c3, attacking this pawn here on f6. But unfortunately, that's just not good enough. Bishop to d5, threatening the queen, coming down here to h1, checkmate. Tough spot for white to be in. Decides to go ahead and take with his knight. The rook takes on d5, and now things have just completely fallen apart. While it may look on the board that things are pretty even, black is in a dominating position right here. No real way for white to continue. If we look at it and say, he can't take the rook right here, the queen could just capture back. He decides to go ahead and take this bishop up here on f8, start to check his opponent. King to d7, rook here to f7, king e8, and then rook to e7. And many people may look at this and say, why would he just give up a rook? The problem is the threat that black has. If you see something like queen to c7, well, now the threat is realized. Rook down here to d1, bishop down e1, only way to stop that, but it's going to be checkmate because of the queen and rook combo here. So white's really just forced to throw everything he can at his opponent just to try to stop any sort of attack that black has. And to do that, you just have to start throwing material away. And that's what MVL does. Rook to e7, king takes, queen up here to c7, check. Just forcing black to retreat some of the material here. Queen to c5, king over here to f7, queen to h5. Eventually, white runs out of options. Queen to g6, and you can see here this is check, forcing the queen to exchange. White has to take here, so queen takes, king takes, and in the endgame, a rook is always going to dominate a bishop. Black can easily put all of his pawns on light squares, chase around all the pawns with his king. No way for white to continue, so MVL decides to go ahead and resign. Vachier-Lagrave gets the victory. Both of these players after round 6 are tied for second. They're in a four-way tie. We have Vachier-Lagrave, we have Nakamura, who came back. We saw him lose in the very first round. He's been having a strong tournament since then. MVL as well as Sergei Karyakin. So all those players are chasing Fabiano Caruana 2 points behind him. But remember, a win is worth 2 points. So they're only one win away from first place here. They have 3 rounds tomorrow to determine the winner of the rapid section. Then they will get into the Blitz. There'll be a rapid champion, a Blitz champion, and then there'll be an overall champion as well. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the tournaments. For those who have been watching the coverage, few sites where you can actually watch the live coverage. I try to take an interesting game each day and then talk about all the other rounds of what's going on. Fabiano Caruana did draw his game, but still holds a strong lead going into the third and final day of the rapid section. So thanks again to everyone for watching. We'll be back tomorrow for a game from either round 7, 8, or 9. Thanks for watching. Bye.